are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Trusts and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about all those matters related to estate planning and trust and estate administration, both from the standpoint of your own needs as individuals, and also from the standpoint of people like my guest and I, who help people in their estate planning and the administration of their estate. And so today, I don't get to say this too often. It seems like most of my military colleague guests seem to be from the Marine Corps for some reason. But today, I'm particularly pleased to have Blair Dell with me. Like me, Blair is a United States Navy veteran. And I think I see a diving helmet behind you there, if I'm not mistaken. Blair and I met through a group of military veterans who meet once a month to talk about how we can help each other, first and foremost in our businesses and professions, but then also just kind of in civilian life in general, bring a little bit of the military camaraderie to our civilian lives. And so really pleased, Blair, to have you on the show. So I have a friend, one of my long-standing friends, his name is Dell, and we were texting all morning. So
pretty common. I answered anything but late for dinner.
Right. Oh, that's funny. I always say the same thing. So Blair, first of all, welcome to the show. Thanks for
having me.
Come on. So we don't have too many military veterans on this show. So if you would start out just a little bit and talk about your professional background and how you got to the work that you're doing today.
Certainly. I'll try to keep this brief, but at least hit the high points. I started out actually in high school as a firefighter EMT. And ran away and joined the circus, i.e. the U.S. Navy. I'm going to deflate your views earlier a little bit. I was a naval corpsman. I spent most of my time with the Marines, so I was with
Moi aussi, right? I'm a chaplain who spent, most of his time, it seemed like, with the Marine Corps, or a lot of his time with the Marine Corps anyway. Yeah.
So I started as an infantry medic and then went to Marine reconnaissance and then spent the latter half of my career in Marine Special Operations Command. In SOCOM, worked in a very asymmetrical environment that pulled me more from my medical component to more of a leadership and understanding of security in bad places around the world. Did multiple combat tours. And when I retired in 2016, I started a small firm called 813 Consulting. Along with trying to give back to my community where I work with the Washington State Patrol SWAT team, I also wanted to reach out to veterans, doing the piece that we spoke on the podcast or group where we met before. But the overall thrust of what I try to do is prepare people, organizations, and agencies for their worst day ever. Take these skill sets that were learned the hard way overseas and see how we can adapt them and mold them in a way that helps people live better lives because they have that peace of mind to know that they're ready when things go wrong. And this isn't your typical doomsday prepper type thing. This is everything from how to prepare for a car wreck, how to have securities in place to avoid cyber issues, and in the case of your podcast here, estate planning and some of the unfortunate challenges that can come with that. That has been a growing area where we've been seeing some requests for assistance in risk navigation.
And it's interesting the direction that your professional life is going, because in my practice too, it seems like there's ever more on the sort of legal side. There's ever more fraud being committed, and I know here in Los Angeles County, we have a lot of judges who are new to the bench. They're not very experienced. And so the opportunity for committing fraud and it lengthening an administration because the judge doesn't have the experience to see through the manipulations has it seems to me increased significantly. And I don't imagine that though you're talking necessarily about legal risks in estate planning, but talk to us if you would. What are the kinds of risk issues in estate planning that you're looking at, that you're seeing as you develop this aspect of your practice?
Certainly. We'll start with the most dynamic, if you will. Probably the one that comes to mind most for anybody who's ever executed or assisted in a contested will setting, and that's the reading. When you have beneficiaries that may or may not be on the same level, friendly, what have you, it can be a very heated, emotionally charged environment. Having a third party that's registered with the state in a security capacity can sometimes provide a more level head, a more level, a cooler, if you will, in the room. People knowing going into it that there are people that are, while the legal representatives are doing their job, there's someone there to make sure everybody leaves the room safely. There's certainly plenty of, you talk to 5 estate planners, you're going to get 10 stories of when will readings went bad. And that's one of the things I was first made aware of, this corner of the market space that could be supported by our assets. Another is securing assets prior to end of life. And this is
Mm,
one I feel very strongly about because I've been brought in for some veterans, other folks that were nearing hospice care or other things of that nature, and were horribly abused and taken advantage of. And
mhm.
the ways we can go about supporting these individuals prior to the execution of the will and trust vary from having an agent on site to having security and surveillance, have health and safety check-ins, a multitude of different ways where we can assist the estate to ensure that the all parties are acting accordingly, and also the people involved are safe and being treated appropriately.
So
Uh,
before you go on from those two, because I have a couple of questions. So on the first one, where there's a reading of the will and people are there in the room. So to be honest, I usually don't get involved at that point. I get involved at the point where either the will is ready to be submitted for probate, so there's already been a reading, or it's been submitted to probate. There's been a lot of dissension among the beneficiaries typically, and so I'm brought in as a neutral third party, if you will, who either all sides can equally trust or mistrust, right, as the case may be, and drive the process forward. So, um, so it sounds like what you're suggesting is at a will reading, there might even be an outbreak of violence as a result of, say, disappointment on the part of an individual, something like that. Um, what are the kinds of incidents that estate planning people have related to you along those lines, to add some vividness, if you will, to this particular aspect?
Absolutely. The biggest concern that I've heard from individuals in this is chemically altered beneficiaries in the room, people that are
Uh,
there and they're not in a effective mindset and to onboard the information correctly, or, and it doesn't need to be or they are emotionally charged, which will happen with any sort of end of life scenario.
mhm.
Those two ingredients make a recipe for disaster. But then you start adding disparate, um, support. When one child gets more than the other, the normal things you hear is quite often that resulting in either threat or actual violence in the room. Or one of the things that we recommend is that whatever security measures are taken are follow all the way to the parking lot until they're in their individual vehicles and depart the premises for a liability for the firm doing the work, but also just making sure everybody stays safe. Just the presence of a person there. And we're not wanting a hulking security guard in body armor. That's not what we're picturing here. This is a person in a suit, casually there, identified by the lawyers. This is our security professional here. He tends to read in, and people are aware, but sits in the back. Hopefully a wallflower and not needed. But I've lost count of the amount of times I've heard from someone who reads wills or does this, I really could have used you in this. And they give me this horror story, either in their office or in the lobby or in the parking lot following out. That's some examples of that.
It is interesting because, excuse me, I have a potential case right now where the long-term live-in partner of the decedent, they were not married, and there was no will, right? And so he's extremely upset about having been essentially left out, right? He's going to get nothing because there's no, under the laws of descent and distribution, he's not entitled to anything. And it appears that he's not particularly well liked by the other beneficiaries. And so that is kind of like pouring, gasoline on the fire, right?
Absolutely.
And I think I know there was no reading of a will because there was no will. But if all these people were in the same room, I would think I would want somebody there who, it is identified as, this is someone who I've asked to be here to make sure that everything goes smoothly and, emotions don't get out of hand, that kind of thing. So,
and I think you hit it earlier just on the head, that disinterested third party, whoever we have in the room doesn't care who gets what. We just care of protecting the client, which would be either the estate or you, making sure that everybody leaves safe and with all the fingers they walk into the room with. The other part to this, though, that is less dynamic, that a lot of people don't think about until it's too late quite often, is the cybersecurity portion of this. And Firewatch Solutions, who I work with on this, they are a full spectrum security solution that looks at it from the physical to the cyber and everything in between. Things like social media accounts as a stepping stone to identity theft. In the case you gave of a live-in partner who may have access to some of the accounts and things of that nature. From an estate perspective, you need to be able to get a solid grip on everything, all assets, and make sure they're distributed as, not necessarily like in this case where there wasn't a will, but if you're brought into it where they will make sure everybody gets what they were intended to get. That's hard to do if there is a bad actor, whether part of the family circle or third party way out there in the weeds, nefariously waiting. If you don't think people aren't reading the obituaries like it's a want ads to come in and take advantage of folks, then you're not being realistic about the environment. With the baby boomer generation, all the things we read about, a exploding estate management environment, these sort of things grow exponentially. And they're almost always a horrible story in some way because people didn't take an ounce of prevention on the front end. And one of the ways it seems that we're getting a lot more tie-in with this is the cyber side of things.
So the second thing you brought up about protecting assets even before a person passes away, that seems to almost combine with the problem of elder abuse that is so unfortunately so frequent. I've had even longstanding close friends who because they don't live in the same city or state as their parents, they eventually get a drift that something not right is going on, and then they come here and they find out what's going on. And one of the when you mentioned cyber, so the first thing that leapt into my mind is because financial assets are so often dealt with online, it is so and it is so easy to move funds around. It can be very easy to, for someone with, shall we say, less than pure intentions, right, to get a hold of a password, an account name and password, or and those assets disappear, and then along I come, and they're all gone. I think I'm in a situation like that right now, where after 3 years, a will was declared fraudulent, and what's left, as far as the court knows, is just a house.
Mhm.
But I can't imagine there weren't bank accounts. Perhaps there were some cryptocurrency accounts, which those are particularly difficult
Mhm.
to deal with. So how do you and your partner, how do you secure those kinds of assets, or can you secure those kinds of assets, so that a bad actor, or just someone who's upset about what's going on, doesn't, in essence, pull them out of the ability of an administrator or an executor or whatever to properly administrate?
Um, that's a great question. And when you're looking at an optimal solution, we're brought in as early as the estate management team is. In a perfect world, you're dealing with potentially a high net worth individual that has a risk or a not risk, estate management team or a family management team.
Mhm.
Before we get towards end of life, we want to be part of the team earlier on, managing that full spectrum security solution approach. If that is the case, we're already tied in and monitoring and ensuring those cyber vulnerabilities are already addressed early on.
Okay.
But where I see it happening most often, most likely, is when people finally make the decision to write a will, designate someone like yourself, or sounds like a little bit before you, an estate manager that does execute wills and things of that nature. And what we ask is we should be part of the checklist that that person uses.
Mhm.
When you're going through and hitting all the key points to ensure that the family is planning for end of life appropriately, contact Firewatch Solutions and Blair and have a discussion, because not any person that says that there's an off the shelf solution for this is trying to sell you something. We just want to have a conversation and discuss from the position of risk navigation rather than just distribution of wealth.
Mhm.
Because we want to make sure that those assets are available to them on the back end. So that's where we would have a discussion saying, all right, you have these properties, you have these vehicles, you have these assets in the cyber realm. And that's when we would bring in our cyber team, look at how they're positioned, whether they're direct to bank, whether there's crypto, all these different things. And there's measures that the team can put in place that say, all right, on prior to um, notification of end of life, we will have quarterly or semi-annually or annually check-ins to check the health of everything. Make
Mm.
sure that those assets, and whether that's a physical inspection, doing what we call penetration testing of assets. Usually it's in the business or corporate setting, but we can do it in the state realm as well. Go in and I look at this from a cyber perspective and a physical perspective and say, yes, everything is as healthy as when we started.
Mhm.
And that goes to notification end of life, where we can set up A to Z, 1, 2, 3, however you wanted to do it. These things will happen automatically. So we're
Mhm.
not playing catch up. We're out ahead of potential bad actors, whether in the family circle or out.
Mhm.
This could be the one that really jumped out at me a while back was a family that had a fleet of vehicles in their family business.
Mm-hmm.
and trying to secure 75 vehicles and make sure that they just don't roll off. That was something beyond the estate manager's realm. Like that was a very panicked call I got from the person saying, "What do I do here?" And when he was anticipating that they would all get stolen and end up in Mexico or someplace,
Right.
I actually was more concerned about when I knew the security system that they were in. I was worried more about their catalytic converters being stolen because
Mm.
of the people involved. And it sure as heck, we got more roll-bys going for, we didn't have physical security, but I contacted local PD, told them there was a vulnerability in their area, and they actually caught a group of folks that were look potentially going in for catalytic converters.
Wow.
That's how we think. We think you pay us for our. You don't have to be paranoid. We can be a little bit for you.
Okay. So
And
you're,
then
I'm sorry.
And then the final piece there is that interim period of hospice care and things of that nature, making sure that the humans involved, that personal touch, having a peace of mind in that emotionally charged environment, being mindful of the now and while we prepare for what's coming next. Having a partner in that is respectful and compassionate to what's going on, but also firmly in place to make sure that all assets and the next steps are done correctly.
So really, and correct me if I'm wrong. Um, it sounds like you come in, whether it's at the estate, in the initial estate planning process, or farther along into the administration process, and you're looking for potential security vulnerabilities that then either you can address, or you can at least alert other people to address within their areas of expertise. Does that sound?
So that you just defined risk navigation in this setting. And in my mind, again, optimal setting, we start when or when the estate managers start. We're part of that initial discussion, and we should be a part of the team all the way through the full dissemination of assets and ensuring that there may be bad feelings, but make sure there's no bad actions involved with it.
So, again, in my work, I'm typically dealing with financial issues, administrative issues, legal issues, and I was offered an assignment a few months ago. It was the one I mentioned. After 3 years, a will had been declared fraudulent, and there's this house, and so I called up a friend of mine who specializes in probate real estate, just to kind of go over the situation with him, in preparation that if I were appointed, we would want to turn around and sell the house, and et cetera. And the first thing he said to me is the house occupied? And I said, good question, I don't know. And he said, here in California, especially, we have such a high instance of squatters. He said, do you have any sense of what's going on with that? And I said, no, didn't even, cross my mind. He said, well, I recommend that you touch base with the potential client on this, because, it's all good and well to get appointed, and explain to them that you're going to act as quickly as possible to administrate the estate. But if there's a squatter in there, that is not necessarily an easy issue to solve.
No, it is that this goes well beyond estate management, and especially in Western coastal states, it's gotten, because of the way the laws have been written. Uh, I live up in Washington State, so between you and me on the coasts, where we encompass a lot of this, and there are legal yet unconventional methods to manage squatters in both for property managers, estate managers. It requires a team that comes in and listens to the estate or property manager's needs and what their end state is, versus trying to come in and just say, I'm a white knight, I'm here to save the day. It's understanding the local laws, what we can employ from uh, already existing assets that your tax dollars go to, And it's not as doom and gloom as the media might make it for you. You get on certain platforms, and it certainly seems like there's nothing you can do. I have a hard time with the word never or can't. I just don't believe in them. There's going to be something we can do, and oddly enough, and this is the one I'm just stunned that more people don't think about, is going in and just having a conversation with the people that are squatting.
Mm.
How often that step is overlooked. Just having a friendly conversation. I'm not here to throw you out or anything like that. I just want to understand what your situation is. Maybe we can entice you to a better situation. Having some empathy for both sides of it, whether it's an insidious environment or not.
Mm-hmm.
But at least on behalf of the estate management team or property management, looking at it from both sides and coming up with solutions where we don't have to go to court. We don't have to get we don't have to get massive property damage, all these different things. They have the most expedient approach. And sometimes that starts with just a good conversation.
Mm.
But unfortunately, that gets overlooked quite a bit. Where we see it the most is in property management with rentals. That can be a real nightmare that can cost property managers millions of dollars in some cases.
Right.
It certainly has an application here. And the other one that some folks, we had this happen twice now where we got brought in, is unexpected wealth at the latter half of life. How many people are out there playing lottery?
Oh, wow.
And it makes it is a big part. Now, fortunately, the folks at the lotteries and stuff like that have gotten really good about telling new winners, these are things you need to do right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it adds a whole nother wrinkle to the whole thing. Or it could be maybe even not the lottery, but the beneficiary you're representing in estate management, they receive as a beneficiary, because people die in groups or roughly the same age groups.
Right.
A large amount of money that nobody was aware of, and then suddenly, or physical property. And that's where we need to make sure we're managing it. And that could be as simple as putting up electronic surveillance that's monitored. Because that's one thing a lot of folks don't grasp is if we trip an alarm, we identify that a squatter is trying to take up residence, and we get law enforcement done on early, it's an intruder, not a squatter.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a lot, depending on where you live and how that's interpreted, there's a lot of different components to it. But if we have video of it happening in the last few hours and we get law enforcement involved, it changes the narrative and dynamic and what's available to us to resolve it a lot more.
Right. So, and you brought up kind of another issue here, and that is people who essentially receive an unexpected windfall. Whether it's lottery winnings or in the case of, somebody passing away, I have a case right now where the beneficiary had no idea how wealthy the decedent was, right? And he gets a call, one day saying, "Hey, your father died, and guess what? He left behind this."
Yeah.
And it was a huge number. A huge number by any definition of the word huge, right? And it brings to mind, I don't remember the exact statistic, but I think something like 50% or 75% of lottery winners, 5 years after they win the lottery, all the money is gone, or it's a very high statistic. I've never seen a similar statistic for people who inherit wealth. Although I remember much earlier in my life talking to a lawyer about this, and he described a similar statistic about people who inherit wealth, that within a few years, all the inherited wealth is gone. So, is that an issue with which you get involved? And if so, what does your involvement look like?
Well, that's certainly where I would I would say on multiple fronts. The first one is I would have so say you brought me in to do an assessment on that case there.
Mm-hmm.
And my first question would be: Is your firm already assisting them in wealth management?
Mm-hmm.
And if not, I'm sure you've got better contacts for your immediate area that you bring them in. If you say no, and this is in Poughkeepsie, BFE, and you have contacts, then I'd reach to my network and see if we can make sure we have a wealth manager who's making sure inheritance taxes are being identified. They're managing their wealth on the backside for investments. Uh, all the things that you do way better than I do,
Mm-hmm.
but we would make sure that those experts are brought in. But
Mm-hmm.
on the physical side, these people don't realize how much of a target they have just become.
Mm-hmm.
This goes beyond the family piece. If the obituary is poorly written, or if it's a big name person, celebrity, and it goes up on headlines and says XYZ celebrity passes, gives all their wealth to son. Well, he
Mm-hmm.
just painted a target on son. And a lot of people don't think about that. If it's someone who's not accustomed to living in that level of wealth,
Mm-hmm.
it is a very difficult, challenging, and potentially dangerous transitionary period. I'll give an example of one individual I had up here in Washington State. It wasn't an inheritance, but he had a windfall from a very successful business deal in tech.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget. We went to go meet him. He's like, "Hey, my wealth manager said you're good to go. We meet?" I meet him at a Starbucks of all places, and I thought that was a little odd. I figured I'd be going to some big corporate office. Guy shows up in a beat up old F-150, and what gets out in Carhartts and everything else. And this is the tech mogul, the multimillionaire, knocking
Mm-hmm.
on billionaire. I talked to on the phone, and he doesn't grasp what his wealth does to people who want to victimize him. And just no, it really didn't register. And that was one of the things I had to start assisting him on, is like, it doesn't matter what your perception of yourself and the world is. The world now has a different perception of you that sadly endangers you and your family.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, you have the wealth to be able to mitigate that in a way um, that risk, we can mitigate that risk in a way that it shouldn't impact you. But we need to talk about how you're rolling about,
Right.
and that would be my number one conversation with them. Even if our consulting and assistance never left beyond all right, you've inherited this windfall,
Mm-hmm.
and here's some basic safety measures. I honestly believe that training and education should, if not every time, always be at least a discussion piece of it, whether they employ us or not or bring us on retainer. Um, I want them to have that education so they're at least aware of the threats as they develop.
Okay. I'm going to take just a break here for a moment, and we'll pick up our conversation in a minute. But I just want to remind everyone, this is Trust and Estates Weekly. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we're here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And if you are involved in estate planning or trust and probate administration, I encourage you to consider joining our LinkedIn group. It's called Trust and Estates Experts. And it's there that we as professionals have the opportunity to share our knowledge with each other. And perhaps more importantly, when we have a question that is either outside of our area of expertise, or maybe it's kind of in our lane, but it's something we're not 100% convinced that we have a good solution for, we can run it by other people and get their input. So I encourage you to join our LinkedIn group, Trust and Estates Experts. Just go to LinkedIn, search that name, and request to join, and I will be happy to admit you. So going back to my guest, Blair Dell, Blair and I have been talking about risk navigation for estate planning. And we were just talking, Blair, about the situation where someone takes on or someone receives a great deal of wealth, and it really changes the context of their life. Now, uh, I'm going to kind of throw something from my own practice out at you. And again, you're changing my perspective on this topic. So I have a situation where a beneficiary, he in this case he got a large sum of money, and one of the things he's always wanted was a very expensive truck. I want to say, I think it's a Ford Raptor. Maybe it was like $100,000 plus truck.
Great truck.
I mean, I don't know the world of trucks, frankly, but it strikes me that this is just he's youngish guy, married, a couple of kids, right? Living a typical middle-class American life. And now all of a sudden there's this, very expensive vehicle parked in, I guess, in front of his house. Or maybe it's in a garage. I don't know. But certainly people are seeing it, driving in and out. What would you see as being the security concerns that come from, even for people who don't know that he's inherited, a chunk of money, but now there's visible evidence that something has changed for him financially. What do you see as being the risk navigational issues in a situation like that?
Well, you hit it on the head. You don't have to be a detective, but that is certainly a clue. As I walk into it without actually doing a full assessment, the very first thing I'm going to actually look at if someone's throwing up red flags that they just came into money is cyber. That's going to be the softest, easiest access to where they will be victimized. That from moving from there, we can discuss their physical environment, their neighborhood, do an assessment of the house, things of that nature. But my biggest thing I'm probably going to look at after cyber is just the mindset of the person. They may need to have, I used to call it in the military, the big brother noogie moment. they need somebody to grab them and say, all right, your life has changed and you need to hear it from someone who, is interested in your well-being. That this is what you're doing right now. Hey, go get your great truck. That no one's saying you shouldn't.
Right.
But let's talk about should that be in your name, or do you have enough wealth right now that we should be getting a wealth manager involved that sets up a living trust / or a LLC nonprofit, some other way to shelter the assets that you're bringing on?
Mm-hmm.
There's a multitude of ways. That's a different podcast, I'm certain. But that's something I would be getting to them is, do you have smart people protecting you, your money, and your assets? Now, on the physical side of it, at a minimum, this person needs to have some sort of surveillance package that's monitored that goes beyond the classic calling 911. 911 is nowhere near as effective as it used to be. What we were led to believe, especially in the Western states, because of the ways laws have been gone recently, defunding of the police. If it's not a violent action in motion, response times are not going to be there for that person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then also talking with them, listen, hey, you do have this much money now and is now being managed by these wealth managers. Should you be living where you're living right now? Should you consider getting a home a little more commensurate with what you've done here and having a gated community, different other assets like that?
Mm-hmm. So it's so interesting because where I thought you were going to go with that in the beginning was not at all. So here's this physical manifestation of wealth, and the first place you went was greater cyber vulnerability. I never would have thought of that. But then when you said it, of course, immediately it's the obvious place to go, right? Because, here he is with his new, and I don't mean this pejoratively at all. He's got his new toy, right? Mm-hmm. And look, good for him. Like you said, I mean, absolutely. Listen,
I've always wanted that truck.
Enjoy. I mean, there's no point in, still driving the 30-year-old F-150 when when you don't want to. But immediately then you go for the soft target, which is identity theft, or whatever else is there, and it seems like a blind spot until someone with your background identifies it. So yeah, fascinating stuff. We've got maybe another, I want to say 5 or 10 minutes. Share with us, if you would, one other risk that you think we need to be aware of as we deal with our estate planning, and sort of the after results of that.
Well, I hate to end on a bad note, but the one that I'm most passionate about, and I hope people consider, is hospice care. If they bring in if the situation is developed end of life, where hospice or a in-home nurse is involved, some sort of checks and balances to make sure that that person is above board. Now that could start on the front end with a good background checks, things of that nature, vetting. I do believe there should be some form of, to use a not an appropriate term, but one that people would understand, a nanny cam type thing, identifying that the actions being done are appropriate, and that person knows they're being monitored, and keep them a little bit above board. That ounce of prevention will go a long ways. I don't want to get into the details, but there was a very tragic case we dealt with down in Kent, not too far from you, where prior military veteran, done well for himself. Family thought they were doing everything they could for him, got him the best care, everything else. And in the wake of his passing, the understanding of just how brutal and tragic his last days were, until without them right there, or even when they were there, and then moments after, and how much assets were lost, the emotional and physical turmoil the individual must have gone through. It is a big part of why I have reached out to more and more estate managers wanting to offer my services. And if nothing else, as you're giving me the opportunity, and I'm thankful for it, to make people aware of it and thinking about it, whether I'm involved or not, to be mindful of what those last days are, and to be able to face their end of life with dignity, and not endure what that hero of our country had to endure for those last weeks of his life.
Right. Just to endorse what you're saying, one of my longest standing friends, his father, he grew up here in LA, and his father was, after a while, unable to take care of himself. And so my friend, who I think was living in Houston when that happened, he wasn't here. So his father brought in a caregiver. And, it was several months later that my friend and his brother found out that his father was being, stolen blind practically by this person. She had ingratiated herself to him, to her patient, so to speak. And all of a sudden, the account numbers weren't adding up, right? Now, fortunately for them, they were on top of it, in the sense that they were reviewing his accounts on a fairly regular basis. And so they caught it pretty quickly. But the trauma that it caused the father, when they basically said to him, this woman is stealing from you and she's got to go. And then they suggested she should be prosecuted, and the father, at that point, I guess, pretty much lost it, and so they had to give up on that idea. The emotional turmoil of of the prosecution of this woman. His attitude was, okay, she took the money, just let it go, kind of thing, right? And to the son's credit, they did. Their father's emotional well-being was more important than the money. But I know it's stuck in their craw, as we said, because here's someone who she'll go and do it to somebody else. I mean, that's the
Mhm.
bottom line, right? I mean, that's how these things work. So um, I'm just curious, and because we need to wrap things up here in a minute or two. How have you dealt with the cross currents in all of these risk navigations, where the emotional issues are in essence pitted against the financial issues? And let's face it, not everybody weights those two the same, right? So for some people, hey, money is king, and your feelings on this, be darned, as they say. So as someone who works in this realm, how do you navigate that? What is a somewhat dichotomous situation?
Well, interesting enough, that's why we use the term risk navigation, not mitigation or elimination. And I truly believe the how in it is I have 2 ears and 2 eyes and one mouth for a reason. Starting into every one of these things with just honest, open, and active listening. That listening to all parties, trying to understand where everybody's coming from, very similar to what I started out doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, where I'm talking to tribal elders and potentially Taliban and all these different things, just learning about the environment, bringing it on in as a very now interested third party. And my interest is in navigating the risks and making sure everybody comes out as well as we can on the backside. So honestly, the best number one thing is listening. We don't do it well enough in most cases, and that's where we start, and then that gives us the tools and information, I would say, to pick the right tools to manage the problem.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, Blair, I appreciate you coming on the show so much, and really helping us delve into what I think is an area that is almost routinely overlooked in the estate planning and estate administration area. And I have a feeling we could go on for another hour citing ever more vulnerabilities, and perhaps we'll have you back to talk about some of those. So for those of you who would like to learn more about what Blair is doing, I'll put his contact information in the show notes, and that way we'll get your website, email address. If you want to post a telephone number, we'll put all of that in the show notes. I encourage you to get in touch with Blair and take advantage of the experience and the knowledge that he brings to bear in this subject. So, as is the case with all of my guests, he's not going to brag on himself. So I'm going to do the shameless plug. but this is a man who has handled similar types of issues in a no kidding combat environment. Okay, and so if you've never heard about just how deeply Marines respect their doc, which is their Navy corpsmen, the relationship is really beyond closeness, and that's what I know, because I've known a number of corpsmen over my years in the Navy and afterwards. This is what Blair brings to the table. So when he says the first thing I do is listen, and listen actively, I guarantee you a large percentage of the most effective therapists in the Navy and the Marine Corps are Navy corpsmen. So I had them dealing with certain things on shipboard, out in the field. They can oftentimes get through where an officer psychologist or even a chaplain like me, just for whatever reason, wasn't able to break through the clutter or the emotion or whatever. So Blair, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking about these issues with us. If you'll hang tight for a minute, I'm going to wrap things up, and then we can talk for a minute offline. So, first of all, For those of you who joined us today, thank you very much. It's always a treat to see we've got people watching us live. The numbers were a little higher today. I think that was probably due to our guest and the interest in the topic. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And I am going to be talking about turning defeat into victory. It is the anniversary of the Battle of the Alamo, and so I'm going to be pulling some business lessons from what happened in that famous epic battle. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m., my show, People Making Money. Again, these are all Pacific time. And I'm going to be talking about the idea of understanding what business are you in. So this is a classic business problem that at a time of rapid change like now with AI and all the other things going on in the economy is something we need to pay very, very close attention to. So I invite you to join me on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Blair, one last thank you for joining me, and wishing you all a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, you are my bell. Courage at all times.